we often underline words like visionary, leadership, commitment, integrity, ethics, and a lot of things. It looks into multiple roles in terms of behavioral competency. He or she is supposed to have communication skills, team management skills, conflict resolution, negotiation, and functional competencies. What are the competencies that are there for the politicians? And it varies at different scales. Today, if somebody aspires to become a politician, and in turn a statesmanship, not necessarily a statement. So the importance of civic education at the initial stage and non-partisan politics at the younger age. So there's a perception that plays a very important role. For whereas in politics, the biggest challenge is people have been disinterested to a large extent. The sense of curiosity, problem solving, initiative taking, and goal orientation is something that defines a statement to a large extent. So to start off with, I'm Muddu Krishna. I'm working with the Department of Personal Training, specifically on Mission Karmayogi, also called as National Program for Civil Service Capacity Building. So I think in our initial statements, we talk about statesmanship, and what defines a statesmanship, we often underline words like visionary, leadership, commitment, integrity, ethics, and a lot of things. At the end of the day, we need to ask ourselves one question. We often say we need educated leaders, but is it what the larger mass is something aiming at? For suppose in the recent elections, there were a village in Andhra Pradesh where they were unhappy because the politicians had not paid them money for voting. So when we say about educated leadership and competencies on to it, the first step towards the reforms in politics should be the people demanding the competency or the the skill set
13 na.
coming from itself. To start off with, I think as Professor John highlighted, we need to differentiate between education and competencies, I would say. So for the first step would be looking into the current parliamentarians, where we have more than 78% of them to be graduates, but does it necessarily mean that they are very competent? We need to ask ourselves at the first. So in the life cycle of the whole approach, like I think Professor Ramkumar was highlighting about the importance of proctored assessments, where we have 360-degree assessments from students' perspectives, seniors. So we are planning something for a civil servant as well in the same lines. A proctored assessment. So suppose there's a health inspector who looks into multiple roles in terms of behavioral competency. He or she is supposed to have communication skills, team management skills, conflict resolution, negotiation, and functional competencies like you know uh, knowledge of rules and regulation in terms of food quality and other things, and the rules and regulations in the governments, and domain-based competency for the health inspector would be food inspection and other stuff. So likewise, we would have a similar lines of competency for our politicians as well. So we need to emphasize on the point key what are the competencies that are there for the politicians, and it varies at different scales. At a local scale, it's different what a councillor should be knowing, or at a national scale would be totally different where the policies have been drafted, or states level it's this individual states challenges would be very different in what they're supposed to know. So I would agree to the point what Professor Ramkumar said, ki we need to have a proctored assessment like what we are planning for a civil servant. So if an officer is working well, you kind of assess from a senior, junior, colleague, and others, and if they're public dealing, we can look for the public, ratings towards them as well. We need to kind of go towards a similar model for politicians as well. And apart from the voting, it's democracy is a continuous process. It's not a one-time thing that we do for 5 years. So we need to think for the modes that we can handle onto it, and stitching that to the student to statesmanship perspective. You can think it like this: today, if somebody aspires to become a politician, and in turn a statesmanship, not necessarily a statement. So, what are the things that they are trying to do? One is the legacy politicians that we have. That's someone who has a background in their way, are much more smooth and laid out on how they can get into the politics, but not necessarily be a statement. So the importance of civic education at the initial stage and non-partisan politics at the younger age, and at the later stage where volunteerships should be taken forward, and the idea of governance should be kind of forward. For suppose we have a lot of discussions and debates. I mean, in the student cultures, we often debate. Okay, this is right. This is that. You are supporting this person X, Y. This. So that's the mode of debates that we have. So instead of the partisan debates that we have, we should be talking about policies. We should be ideally supporting policies than people. That attachment to detachment that we use it as a common trend all across in different sectors should be coming to the politics as well. And if you think into the next part of the life cycles, I think Professor Sridhar kind of identified this as the perception, and the same challenges with the civil servants as well. So, for suppose if I say about an organization, so maybe in terms of police forces or in terms of armed forces, people have a different perception of an armed forces, Jawan and a police forces constant. So there's a perception that plays a very important role. For whereas in politics, the biggest challenge is people have been disinterested to a large extent, but the curiosity, it's a paradox. People are disinterested to a certain extent in a certain factors, but people are very curious because that impacts their day-to-day life to a large extent. So we need to look into perception management, and uh, for that perception, we need more and more people to kind of come into the systems. Like we talk about bureaucratic transformation, we often say, minimum government and maximum governance. In the same sense, in the opposite sense, we need maximum number of people to kind of participate in the politics. So that's something that should be envisioned. For that to happen, we need to talk about career choices and how safe landings can be done. So we were talking about certain competencies. That's like there's something very common between all the students and the statements. That's like the sense of curiosity, problem solving, initiative taking, and goal orientation is something that defines the statements to a large extent. So how do we cultivate that from, I would not just say the academic lens, even after going out of the college, if they ever think of stepping up into the public life, there should always be a backup. For suppose I know a lot of young politicians who kind of made to feel to become a biggest stature in the political structure, but they had got an opportunity in the corporate life in a different manner. So if these competencies are very strong, I would say that's a very good way to get more people into the government ecosystem. For being more, as we get more people, we get more politicians, and more politicians. There are high probability of getting more statesmen as well. And effectively, the bigger picture that defines a statement is the legacy and impact, and how they groom the next generation of leaders and people on the way is something that we need to look into. And the current efforts that I see is, although certain political parties have their own training divisions that exist in the countries from 1930s, there was some set of example as well as the concurrently. But until and unless people are valuing that, no political party is going to take it seriously. Why do ultimately resulting to the question that we started? Why should be someone educated? So I think that is my point of perspective. Thank you all.